As Europe tries to find a way to deal collectively with migrants and refugees, Greece, a small frontline country in the migration crisis, has reported an increase in asylum seekers. Filio Contrafuri has this story from Athens.
Police checks at Greece's largest airport are intense and around the clock. From the moment passengers arrive at the Athens International Airport, specially trained police scan the area for smugglers and asylum seekers they suspect may try to sneak on a flight to Europe on a fake passport. They also perform selective passport checks on those traveling to Europe's Schengen countries, where there are no border controls. Every day, dozens of migrants and refugees try to illegally head to Europe from Greece's airports, and dozens more are stopped.
The Greek police have developed a special action plan for travel within the Schengen area with 4 security zones. So for someone to travel from Athens International Airport to another EU member state with fake travel documents, I'd say it's impossible. And the results of this plan are impressive.
As Europe is closing its borders tighter to refugees, arrivals by sea to the Greek islands from Turkey continue at a rate of about 80 per day. The UN Refugee Agency reports that Greece currently hosts 58,000 migrants and refugees. Most migrants still deem this country a transit point, either because they already have relatives elsewhere in Europe or because Greece, compared to other EU countries, provides them with limited opportunities and assistance.
This abandoned factory was converted to a camp during the 2015 refugee crisis and closed less than 2 years later. The government hastily reopened it in March, along with several other camps across the country, to temporarily accommodate the growing number of asylum seekers reaching Greece.
It's the first time a TV crew is allowed to film here since the camp reopened. Over 300 people, mostly from Syria, live in tiny rooms shared by entire families. The government provides them 3 meals a day and every month gives them a small allowance to buy extra food.
See what he will put inside.
Yet many lack even the basics. Mohammed from Afrin doesn't even have pillows for his children or proper baby formula. The government is trying to make the camp more livable, yet for refugees like Ibra, there's no time left to wait until that happens.
If we want to looking for a job, there is no job. We want to continue to Europe to find a job there. It's better than here. It's not allowed. I'm going back to Turkey because unfortunately I'm disappointed. I couldn't find myself here. I'm sitting doing nothing, you know. I don't want to destroy my mind. I don't want to be a lazy person, less home. I don't want to stay just fighting for food every morning, for 1 bottle of water.
Europe's border security agency Frontex says an alarming increase in crossings from the land border with Turkey has been driving asylum seeker arrivals in Greece way up, almost 20,000 in total during the first 5 months of this year. Greece becomes again Europe's main point of entry, followed by Italy. Meanwhile, Europe remains divided on the migration burden. But if Greece is to cope with its massive share because of its geography, that task could turn impossible without the help of its European allies. Filio Contrafuri, CGTN, Athens.
Let's get you more on North Africa's perspective. I'm joined from Cairo by Khalid Dawood, a political analyst at Al Ahram Weekly. Khalid, Morocco has rejected the EU's proposal to host detention centers. What's the stance from other North African countries?
Well, let me say first of all that it's obvious that the European Union want to solve its own internal problems at the expense of North African nations. As you know, there's been a rise in right-wing populist parties in countries like Italy, in Germany, and in several other European countries, including, of course, former Eastern European nations that have been adopting a very critical attitude towards the issue of migration. And probably this is where this proposal stems from, that they want to solve the problems of Italy, of Spain, of Greece, at the expense of Northern African nations such as Morocco, Tunisia, and Algeria, and sometimes even proposals extend as far as Egypt. I guess it's, for me personally, as a North African, this is like almost immoral. I mean, why should we be asked to establish detention centers basically in our own countries while the European nations consider their cases, and this is something that we cannot trust. I mean, there is no reason why we can believe that the European countries are at one point or the other going to take in these immigrants, and I don't think that any of the North African nations, whether Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, or even Libya or Egypt, would accept such a proposal by the European countries to establish detention centers on our own territories.
The EU is talking about providing finance for North African countries. What sort of funding does the region need, and would that be an incentive?
Well, the problem, that it's not really clear what exactly do the Europeans want from the North African countries. I mean, it's like we've seen this perhaps happening before with a country like Turkey, or immediately after the start of the Syrian civil war, whereby there was a deal reached between the European nations and Turkey got something like $3 billion so that it can basically control its own borders and prevent the flow of Syrian immigrants from Turkey to Greece. While in the case of the North African nations, it's not clear at all what are the European countries talking about, what are the economic returns, what are the guarantees that this issue is going to be treated in a proper manner, respecting the human dignity of the African people who are African or whatever the nationality they are coming from, trying to escape through North Africa going to Europe. Besides, personally, I believe that instead of offering such solutions, if they could be called solutions, there should be more effort exerted in investing in African countries or in finding political solutions for the wars that exist in places like Syria or in Libya or in Iraq, so that we can have better control over the migration issues. I mean, instead of offering African nations, North African nations, some money to absorb those immigrants, perhaps we can go to the African countries themselves and invest money there, create jobs for the African nations, and this could be one way where we can avoid the continuation of this problem. But again, you know, I think this has mostly to do with the new government that exists in Italy right now. We've seen how the Interior Minister, Mr. Salvini, dealt with the issue of the ship Aquarius that had more than 600 immigrants refusing to receive them, and those people had to stay in the sea for days and days until finally Spain had to accept them. And we can also see countries like Hungary, like Poland, who are vehemently against receiving any immigrants. So there are no guarantees. The entire issue is voluntary, and I think that we've heard such European promises before.
All right, Khaled Dawood, thank you for joining us.